Fill her up.
You're listening to the Gas Digital Network.
Good afternoon, Michael Malice here. Let that be your welcome for the next hour. We have with us once again my good friend, comedian Dave Smith, host of Part of the Problem, 1/3 Legion of Skanks, star of the Libertas #1 comedy special, and possible future president of the United Skanks of America.
I would call myself the presumptive president at this point.
Well, Lewis is not having a good time.
No.
I think everyone really enjoys messing with Lewis. I think it is warranted. We can call this karma. I feel like Jay is completely staying under the radar.
Yeah, it's true. It's that's just the way the races shook out. Look, at this point, it's really a two-man race between me and Ari Shafir, and that's what we expected when Ari announced, and we're gonna battle it out tonight.
So is Soder going to be his running mate?
I don't know. Tonight we will announce all of the VP picks.
Okay.
But,
you have a VP pick.
I have a VP pick, but I can't announce
Sure.
it this time. So I don't know. But I don't think Soder's going to be his VP. Soder wishes to stay behind the scenes and manipulate people with his billions money.
Okay. Who do you anticipate being Lewis's VP? Is it going to be Zach Amico?
You know, I really don't know. I don't think so. I think Lewis knows that he's way behind in the campaign, and he needs like a shakeup pick. He needs to go like McCain, Palin, try to shake everything up. So I'm looking for something unexpected out of the Gomez ticket.
There's a part of me. So I tweeted out for all my listeners to send an email to that email address so that they can vote for the election. And you guys are welcome for this mailing list that you know have to spam them indefinitely with your pornography and boner pills. Excuse me, chewables. There's a part of me that really wants to like have Tom Woods be Lewis's running mate, just because it would be so mental. They did meet each other on at the
Lewis did Tom's show.
Yeah, at Compound Rehab when I was had Tom as my guest.
That was where they first met, and then he invited Lewis on his show shortly after. You made that bizarre connection that probably never should have existed in the universe.
And they got on fine.
Yeah, it was actually a really great episode.
Yeah. Lewis is a good dude, but he could just never be allowed toward any position of power under any circumstances.
Exactly.
He threatened to have my ads dry up. He's like, you know, like, you tiny Jew, who are you messing with? He goes, test me. And I go, do you mean the SATs? Because I would enjoy that. How did he get an F on the SATs?
Lewis just wrote F on it.
F this.
F.
Okay, so who can you say? So do you have any predictions as to who Jay's running mate's going to be?
Jay's running mate is already Lewis. Jay picked Lewis as his vice president, I think in an effort to undercut Lewis's campaign early on. So that's the only one we know, and I have no clue. I have no clue who the other guys are going with.
Okay. Why can you? I want just to fuck with the audience, which I love to do. Can you on the chat tell me who your running mate is, and I won't repeat it. I promise.
All right. Oh no, you know what? I can't because all these guys can see it too. But
text me.
I'll text you.
Yeah. Message Gmail. I don't have my phone on me.
Gmail. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Let me see who this is. Let me see who this Paramore is. I love this inside baseball stuff because as a fan, it makes me so angry not knowing these kind of things.
Oh yeah, it's infuriating.
I know. So it's so fun. By the time this airs, it'll be out anyway, so it's not really that big a deal.
That's true. They'll all already know who it is. I didn't even think about that. I just sent it to you.
Okay, let's see. Refresh. Oh! Ooh.
It's a good pick.
Good pick.
It's an excellent pick.
Oh, that is an excellent pick. Oh, damn. Okay. Ooh, this changes a lot. This
I
are
didn't
you
I didn't even need a game changer pick, but
right?
I still went bold in my choice.
Was there any hesitancy from this person to join your ticket?
No, jumped at the chance.
Okay.
Was thrilled to be on board.
Yeah. Okay. Fans of the
Everything he stands for is everything that I already stood for. So it was a very easy it was an easy pick.
Let's change tracks a little bit. One of the things that I have been talking about is the New York Times and their 1619 project, which has been very much attacked by historians, which is, in my view, I think it's a change from how they have operated historically, because historically the New York Times is a newspaper. It's about contemporary events, things that are breaking around the world. They're very well known for their international bureaus and presence. And this is a very different thing. This is much more of them trying to become the New Yorker magazine or something like that. And they, for those who don't know, what the 1619 project is, and I think the woman running is like Ida Wells or something like that, or Ida May, something. I apologize for not having her name off the top of my head. It's basically an attempt to rewrite history and redefine America as having been founded in 1619. Like, this is the foundational moment of America. And that being the year when the first slave was here in the States. I'm quite confident they don't really talk much about all the white slaves that were here. It's referred to in history books indentured servitude, because that kind of makes things a little awkward. No one's giving them any restitution and or sending them back to Ireland where they belong, if they belong anywhere on this earth. And there's two ways of looking at this. One is this is them flexing their muscle. The other is this is them kind of going down swinging. They're losing the narrative. They might as well go all in. Another situation is that, since we're kind of self-segregating, like the Scott Adams idea of two movies on one screen, that they're going to naturally speak in more and more radical tones to those who are listening to them and taking orders from them. And it's probably a mix of all three. What are your thoughts on this whole project?
Well, it is, the funny thing is that I really, really love revisionist history. I think it's I think it's the most important work that's done.
Okay. We're not talking about the Holocaust, Dave. Just other types of revisionist history. But Biden, just once.
Well, it's funny but even the Holocaust is kind of the official story now is somewhat revisionist history. I mean, like at the time, it was not at all the justification for entering World War II.
Oh,
it's
it's
post hoc used as the justification.
Just like slavery and Civil War.
Yes, exactly. And truthfully speaking, the kind of what we all know is the official narrative of the Holocaust now is really only came into popular understanding in like the 70s. It wasn't like really, even like by the 50s, that you didn't see this stuff like really being used as the justification. So that's actually an example of revisionist history being somewhat helpful, at least in understanding how brutal the Holocaust was in reality. But I love a lot. I mean, everything Murray Rothbard did as a historian was revisionist history. Oftentimes, what you get, the official version of history that's declared immediately is just whatever the winners, whoever conquered, decides is to be said, and then it takes really, a lot of hard work to go back and figure out, well, what was actually going on here. But as is often the case, I think a lot of times when people do revisionist history, they're looking for it to be useful in some way. So they're looking for it to help their narrative.
Yeah.
And in this case, it just seems to be a very boring, standard kind of narrative of slavery is what defines America. Slavery is where the true essence of America began. And personally, I think that there's no way to accurately understand what was going on in the continent of that we live in now, in the country, at least the part of it that was populated by European settlers, from the 1600s to 1865, without talking about slavery. I mean, it's a major, it's a major institution. It's the most evil institution that we ever had as a country, and it's the most anti-liberty institution we ever had. But in terms of the story of the United States of America, I really think slavery is more what is not unique about America than what is unique. And that slavery, of course, has existed throughout the world, still exists in many places. So I think it's very reductionist to describe the American experiment as slavery, and it's useful for them.
So I am on the fence about a conceptualization of something, and I want to hear your thoughts to maybe you could help me clear it out. Because a lot of times if my thinking goes along the same pattern as some group that I don't like or respect, I'm thinking I made the wrong turn. And then I'm like, but that's stupid, because maybe they're right on this instance. One of the things I had a poll, and I don't remember the results, so I don't know why I bring it up, but I said the term Marxist or communist is used with eye rolling in popular discourse, right? When people are accused of being Marxist, a lot of people are like, yeah, okay, well, whatever. And we see it to some extent when you have like people like Glenn Beck, like matter-of-factly refer to Obama as a Marxist. And it's like, I don't see it. I mean, if you want to say that the contemporary progressivism is heavily influenced by Marxism, sure. If you want to say he literally wants, kind of this Stalinist totalitarian, system, I don't see it at all. I don't think he's that, has that much principle or is that committed to the revolution.
Let me just say, I hate it because it so fundamentally misunderstands what the ruling elite are.
Yeah.
They are not Marxists, they're corporatists, and there's a big freaking difference between the two. I mean, come on. They are not after state ownership of the means of production and abolishing private property. This is not at all the game plan. That's not why the big banks are funding them. They're funding them because they want a controlled economy where the banks are the controllers. And that's a very different thing. And I hate it. It's like when people refer to, they'll like when people call people fascists on Twitter just as a shorthand for authoritarian or something like that. There's a lot more to it than that. And so, yeah, I think it's horrible.
Well, I mean, a lot of people who get called fascists deserve it, Dave.
Well, yes, the majority of them, and they're good friends. And, well, sometimes.
But this is where I'm on the fence about, because I'm the Marxist history, and I'm doing a bit of reading about now in like the late 1800s, the early 20th century. They had this veneration of the labor class. And not only is it veneration in the sense like these are the good people in our society, the workers are going to kind of run everything and they're like inherently pure and good, but it also extends to the arts, where you had some rando bricklayer or someone who works in a factory. If he wrote a poem or like made a sculpture, they were like, oh my God, because this is like the working class expressing itself through this one individual. And they were just tripping all over themselves to venerate this simply because of this person's economic class and origin. And I have made the point, this point I'm not confused about or kind of hesitant about, that that veneration of the working man, the manual laborer, with the new left in the late 60s, went from venerating them to venerating people of color, and specifically African Americans. And if you see some African American who's a singer, Tupac is the Shakespeare of our time. Like, they cannot help but bend over themselves, tripping over to praise and venerate someone simply because they are a person of color. And this is not done that heavily among Black people. It is very much a function of whites and urban whites who are like, oh my God, he's so amazing. And it's like, yeah, I would be very hesitant. I would bet good money, rather, that Ta-Nehisi Coates if you had a poll, is treated with more veneration and respect and all the other honorifics by people who are white than people who are African American. And I'm wondering, I'm like, okay, is this basically still Marxism? That instead of venerating an economic class, they are now simply venerating a race? and taking it completely devoid of any context and only be like, instead of being like, oh my God, I love this plumber, you know, he sings with his hands, like, oh my God, I love this person of color. I wonder if it's the same sociological phenomenon, because it's telling me that it is, but if that's true, then calling them Marxist isn't crazy.
Well, I think I don't use the term often because I don't think it's a great term, but cultural Marxism
Yeah.
does kind of accurately describe the phenomenon that you're talking about. And part of the reason why I don't like using the term cultural Marxism is because, well, number one, no one identifies as a cultural Marxist. It's also taken in, it means different things to different people. And like to some people, it means like, oh, you have some problem with like interracial dating or something like that.
Sure.
And then to others, it means that the Frankfurt School took over the United States of America and they've been kind of pulling the strings like puppet masters. And I don't believe any of that stuff. So I do think the Frankfurt School was somewhat influential. I think there are lots of different groups that were influential, and it's all kind of a soup of all of this, postmodernism, cultural Marxism, intersectionality, all of this stuff. But whatever term you want to call it, the idea of looking at everything. So if what Marx originally said is basically, the quick version is that everything throughout history can be reduced to class struggle.
Yes.
That all of history is class struggle. And there's one class that's exploiting the other class. And this very quickly turned into everything this class does is wrong and everything this class does is right. And that being applied to cultural groups, races, white oppressing black, men oppressing women, straights oppressing gays, cisgenders oppressing transgenders, is the lens that a whole lot of people on the left look at everything through.
Literally everything, yeah.
Literally everything. And so you will bend over backward. If confronted with anything that the oppressed group might be doing wrong, you will twist yourself into pretzels to justify it. You cannot condemn it. And anything that deemed the oppressor group is doing, it can be condemned immediately. The slightest infraction by a white person, if a white person says, I don't see color, that's racist. But if a black person, could like hate white people, and it's like, well, they're oppressed and they're, so it's this kind of weird standard. And I think it's an inaccurate, very reductionist way of looking at the world. But whatever you want to call that, it is very dominant in our culture. And this is why you see even people like, not even to get into that whole thing again, but why you see leadership at the LP siding with Black Lives Matter, because, well, it's just kind of wired into all of us that, well, they're the oppressed group, so therefore they have to be right. And the truth is that
and
life
virtuous.
is a lot more, yes, and virtuous. And that's what I meant by right, like right in the moral sense, and the truth is that life is much, 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 much more complicated than that. Oftentimes people who are oppressed do really shitty things. Like that's just a reality of life. People who are abused as children turn into abusers. They're not just victim. They're not just oppressed or oppressor. Oftentimes they're both. And also people who are in higher classes quite often help people who are in lower classes. People who run factories create opportunities for people. And so life is just much more complicated than that. And there's really bad implications that come out of viewing the world that way.
Hey guys, Michael Malice here. Want to tell you about today's sponsor, Reel Paper, REEL Paper. They're here to make sure you never run out of toilet paper ever again. What is it? 3-ply toilet paper delivered straight to your door. It is very soft, it is durable, and it's also made out of sustainable bamboo. You know how people say there's a bear shit in the woods? Well, apparently they mean pandas. And now you could be that bear. If you go to reelpaper.com, REELPAPER.com, and use code WELCOME, you get 10% off a single purchase or your first subscription order, and free, this is the part I love. I love free shipping. People come to your house, they'll be like, what's up with this toilet paper? Oh, that reel? Yeah, it's a 3-ply made of bamboo. Oh, it's like a reel of toilet paper. I just got that. I'm not kidding. I thought it was a pun on REAL, but it's also because it's like a reel of paper. Okay. This is how we make the magic. If you go to reelpaper.com, use code WELCOME, you will have the best toilet paper you've ever had in your life shipped to your door for free with 10% off. Use the code WELCOME, and let's get back to the show. I had this big epiphany last night about how like the alt-right views race. You know, I'm from New York all my life, as are you. I have a very diverse group of friends, and by diverse, I don't mean a black person. I mean it's international. I'm an immigrant, and so on and so forth, and I enjoy that because for me, it's interesting to know, like, oh, I have a friend who's Japanese, like I could pick their brain, or some from the Middle East or India or something like that. And there was a video I saw yesterday on Twitter, which was probably easily one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen. There was this young black kid, guy, whatever. He was working at like a nursing home or something like that, and he would beat the shit out of old men and film it, and he put it on the air. And like it was, you watch it, this old guy getting punched in the face, and this kid was a boxer, you know, so you know he got some power in his hands. And it's easy for it. You know what? Like if you asked me, which can you relate to of these three? Raping someone, murdering someone, or doing this, like this would be the third by far. Like by far, I mean, rape would be tough, but murder you can wrap your head around. But punching an innocent old person repeatedly in the face and then putting it on YouTube, there's no bridge between my mindset, which is, you know, filled with sadism. Let's be honest, and that, like, there's nothing. And I realized that I think for a lot of people, that if they looked at a middle-aged black woman who lived in that same neighborhood as him, who worked in an office, maybe she's loud, maybe she's kind of a bitch, they will think she is closer to him than she is to them, to the viewer. And I think a lot of people who are uncomfortable with how race is used in this country, and you and I both talked to me for my book, you on your show, sincerely feel that a significant, let's suppose 25% of black people would watch that video and would be fine with it, or would actually approve of it. What do you think?
Are you saying, you're saying you believe that a
no,
large
I'm saying I think a lot of people that we know,
yes,
like,
would
in these far right
believe
circles,
right.
like instinctively they'll think, oh, they're fine with this.
Yeah, and I think the irony of that is that, truthfully speaking, it's really the white leftists who would be more likely to view that and somehow justify it. Yes, somehow find, you know, not that they wouldn't condemn it, but they would condemn it with a but right afterward, and then give you a long story about the, you know, systematic oppression, systemic, you know, racism or something like that. Yeah, I think that is that is the view, and I think it's absolutely wrong, and that these things are, the truth is that the vast majority of black people who saw something like that would probably say that dude should have the shit beaten out of him. Yeah. And that would usually be their response to it. At least that's my guess.
Because the reason this came to me,
I did see that video too. It was incredibly disturbing.
And there were several of them.
Yeah.
It wasn't just one. He was arrested, thankfully, in Michigan. And this is the internet at its best. Like, you know, like 4chan, there was a video some girl made. She took kittens and threw them in a river somewhere on earth, and they found her, and they got her in trouble. So that to me is like the trolls at their best, using the term troll loosely. I thought of it because I had a tweet yesterday, and I said, for the first time in my life, I don't know anyone who's optimistic about New York City's future. And a lot of the boomer cons came out en masse and were like, well, that's what you get for voting Democrat. And I was sitting there, and it takes a lot to get me disturbed. And I'm like, why is this upsetting me so much? And what I realized is, I'm all for national ideological self-segregation. I think America needs to break up, and I'm against political discourse, as you know, and I talk about constantly. But it's still very jarring to me that, from your perspective, a person's perspective, if someone goes in the voting booth once a year and makes the wrong choice of the two, not even knowing their reason, you're perfectly happy to basically read them out of the human race and be like, good, I'm glad your neighborhood burned. This is what this is what you voted for. And I'm like, I don't wish that on anyone. And especially to just dismiss them in such specific ways based on one choice that they made. I mean, if you said like, oh, you know, she's in an abusive relationship, she's got kids, and it's kind of hard for her to get out, and, you know, he broke her jaw, you wouldn't be like, well, you shouldn't have stayed. Some people would, but I think most people would be like, oh my God, that's horrible. But in this case, they revel in the fact that the cities are kind of on fire. And I wonder why that is from your perspective.
Yeah, it's I guess it's really just like this tribalist thing, and they're so, invested in labeling people into these groups. You're a Democrat, you're a Republican. The Democrats are losing, and this is blowing up in their face. I remember, what it reminds me of is I remember I had this guy, Ben Burgess, who I like very much, who I had on my podcast, and he's a Democratic socialist, college professor. And we were debating about, but he's a good guy, but I just think his politics are terrible.
No.
But anyway, so we
No.
were debating, libertarianism versus democratic socialism. And I said to him at one point, because he was kind of dismissive of the non-aggression principle and respect for private property rights. And I said at one point something along the lines where I was like, Ben, you do kind of live your life by these values.
Yeah.
Like I know for a fact you do. I know you don't take other people's shit. I know you don't assault other people. You don't take what's not yours. So you make this one exception for the state, but you have to at least grant that there is kind of something to this idea of not initiating violence against other people, not harming their property, not taking their stuff, right? And he goes, well, I don't know if I live my life by that because I vote for people like Bernie Sanders and people like that. And I was like, right, but that's only in that area. In every other area in your life, you are following the rules we're for.
If he was on a jury, he wouldn't be like, I don't believe in the NAP, acquitted.
Yes, well, but exactly, like this is it, and there's something to that. And this is an extreme example of a professor who's a democratic socialist. He's really thought this things through. That is not the representation of most people who are just voting left. I mean, it's quite possible that they don't even really read that much about this. It's the vast majority of people. They're not really immersed in this. It's kind of just like, once a year, it's kind of this ritual of believing in the state. And they follow the non-aggression principle and everything else perfectly the rest of the year. And that's the more difficult case. The more obvious one to respond to these boomer cons is like, well, what about the 50% of people who don't even vote?
Yeah.
I mean, they don't even vote. And how about the 8% or whatever who vote Republican? I mean, they all suffer too. So it's all just a horrible take.
We had a Bush presidency and a Bush Congress. Was it heaven on earth?
Right.
I mean, but it's very kind of it's one of the things about social media, which is interesting to me, is it allows people to speak their mind. And it's an opportunity for people who I'd never meet or interact with in another context, for me to see how they're thinking when they're kind of being expressive and feel comfortable with their point of view. And seeing, like, a lot of times it's basically like someone throwing a toaster into a bathtub. Like, you could follow the train of thought and it's not stupid per se. It makes logical sense on its own terms, but it is so fundamentally divorced from reality or kind of like self-referential that you sit there and you're like, how can you say this with a straight face? And I'll give you one example, which just blew my mind yesterday, when someone was saying, again, talking about voting, and they made the point, goes, well, like, you have to vote out all Democrats. And I go, okay, when you vote out all Democrats and the budgets keep going up and you have war and the wall still isn't being built and the Supreme Court is voting for progressive perspectives on various issues, you're just going to say they're all rhinos.
Yeah.
And they go, yeah, we have to vote them out too. And it's like, okay, at a certain point, there's only so many tissues in this box.
Right.
And what is this I mean, it is quite literally a fairy tale. This was what Rand was accused of writing by, I think, Whittaker Chambers in National Review, in his scathing review of Atlas Shrugged, that this is this mythology of the children of light versus the children of darkness. At any minute now, the Democrats believe this very heavily because of demographics. The Republicans believe this because people are waking up, that this will be the final victory of the good guys over the bad guys, and there will never again be either a Republican president or, a Democratic president or blah, blah, blah. And you sit there and you're like, guys, the Democratic Party, American Democratic Party, is the oldest political party on earth that's been continuously in as an entity. That's not an accident. That happens. You can't accidentally be number one. I mean, especially when you're competing with literally every party on earth. That speaks to something. The Republican Party being around since, the 1850s, that's no joke either. to be that powerful for that prolonged. And to say like, well, in a few years, it's all said and done. It's just like, have trouble understanding how an adult who has enough data over their lifetime to see the pendulum swing can say this with a straight face.
It's a weird mix of these different kind of natural desires that human beings have. And it's kind of like how in every movie, the crime gets solved or the good guy saves the day, or there's kind of like this ending. We know there are these problems, but we get to this point where there's a resolution and everything's solved and things work out. And I'm not making the case that we've been programmed that way from the movies. I think it's in us, and that's why we like to see it in movies a lot. And people like to it's probably something about like evolution through like warring tribes, where at the end your tribe will win and then everything's okay. Then we don't have to worry about the threat of the other tribe anymore. And people like to look, I mean, you look at something like a game of football or something, where people like to get into stadiums and you root for team blue and I root for team red and we lose our minds. And we know this means nothing. We know that you're just talking about getting a ball over a line. Like, this has no ramifications in real life, but we'll go crazy. And so there's this weird thing where people want to believe that this is, it's like with the stuff with the Trump's about to bust this pedo ring. It's all about to come out. Like the conspiracy is there. And then at the end of the day, we reveal who the conspirators are, and they all face justice. But if you actually look at human history, that's never the case. They just continue to rule over you, and they find different ways, and the power shifts from one area to the other. And it's very divorced from actual reality. The truth is, the reason why both these parties have existed for so long is that the duopoly system is an incredibly stable system to rule people with. And this is why it's been so successful, and this is why it's outlasted many one-party dictatorships, which is a much more unstable system. Because when people get fed up with that system, the only answer is revolution. But when people get fed up with the Republicans, you vote in the Democrats. When they get fed up with the Democrats, you vote in the Republicans, and it kind of balances itself out. But of course, you're right. One-party rule has been the most disastrous times in America. And I'm sure it would be if we had it again.
Yeah, but it's just very sad to me how the bloodlust people have just for. And here's the other question I have. They go, oh, the Democrats are ruining these cities. And I asked someone, I had to block someone. I said, if that's true, price is a function of demand. You can't have high prices without high demand. You can't charge $5,000 rents in some rural area. It's not a possibility. How do they explain the San Francisco's rents being so astronomical? Sure, part of it is forced reduction of supply, but if you have some field in the middle of nowhere and you say you can only build 2 houses here, okay,
there still has to be demand.
There has to be demand, and there's no real explanation for why there is such high demand to live in these cities if they're at the same time, it's supposed to be these complete hellholes. Is there nothing good about them that these Democrat-run cities are doing?
Right. And it's also this thing that I hate so much. It's like reducing everything to politics.
Yes.
As if that's the reason, like that you want to live in New York City is something about the state income tax or about, housing subsidies or something like that. I mean, like, the reason people like New York City is because there's a ton of great, there's restaurants and museums and theater and a lot of people and different cultures and there's a million different reasons that people love New York City. Very few of them, if any, have to do with Albany and what they've decreed this year of how people have to organize. And so it's just, you miss this whole big area of life, which is what most people are all about. And you would think small government people would appreciate that, seeing as how they don't want government to run every aspect of life. Presumably there'll be other things that you're living for. But I also, what just drives me crazy about that is that it's like, okay, yes, democratic policies have been very destructive in a lot of these cities, and they've caused real damage. I'm against just about all of them. But dude, like, Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush helped ship cocaine into the country. The vast majority of it ended up in big cities. And then they were fighting a drug war simultaneously through federal mandate, cracking down on people who were then dealing the drugs that they shipped in. And they literally created this system where it completely created and incentivized black markets, gang activities. The idea that this is all at the feet of Democrats is not accurate. And it really absolves Republicans of a lot of blame that they have historically for this stuff as well.
Yeah, because I came back at someone who was arguing with me, and I said, New York had a Republican governor for 12 years, Pataki, 12 or 16, I think it was 12. Nelson Rockefeller had been governor of New York for decades. During the worst period of New York, the late 60s, John Lindsay was the Republican mayor of New York. We had 20 years of Giuliani and then Bloomberg. If you want to be this kind of thinker and say Bloomberg equals Republican, whereas now he was running for president as a Democrat, as a hard left, that's not hard left, but like certainly not a moderate particularly, and taking the textbook Democratic views. It's kind of like when you like them, they're a Republican, and when you hate them, they're a rhino, which will tell you it's not as simple as having an R and a D. Now you can say that R's tend to be better than D's as executives, but then you're like, okay, then you have Mitt Romney as governor of Massachusetts, and he gives you Romney Care, your hero. Yeah. So it's kind of like, I long for the days when I could be so simple in my thinking that I could be like, it's just a simple equation. I look at this chart, Republican mayor, good. Democratic mayor, bad. And I don't have to think anymore about it, case closed.
Yeah, well, there's there's certainly, not that it's all positive, but one of the really positive developments in politics over the last 4 years or so was that the Trump campaign of 2016 and the Bernie Sanders campaign of 2016 and 2020 were both essentially third-party candidacies within the two big parties, and that they were both very clearly, Trump more so because he's Trump, rejections of both of the major parties. They were not people who were like, oh, the Democrats are all good. Sanders was not saying, oh, the Democrats are all good, we just got to get the Republicans out. And Trump was not saying the Republicans are all good, we just got to get the Democrats out. So obviously there's a lot of negatives that came along with both of those guys as well. But maybe one of the positives is a sign that people are a little more willing to break out of that mentality.
Something that happened last week that I found, I didn't know how to feel about it. Maybe you can tell me how I'm supposed to feel about it, because I was feeling some sort of way and I couldn't exactly nail what my emotional mix was. You and I had a little discussion about if we were running the Jorgensen campaign ad, like what the ads would look like. And someone on Twitter within a day had taken that clip, I think it was on your show, and they actually made the ad. And the ad was excellent. They used the wrong clip. When I was talking about George H.W. Bush, they had the clip of him saying, "Read my lips." There was a clip of him in 1990, I believe, when he was standing, I think probably in the White House lawn with the members of Congress, saying that this budget, I'm raising taxes, but this will cut the budget deficit in half in 5 years, which is basically the exact same promise his son later made. And the tax cuts came and the spending cuts, of course, never did. Just lather, rinse, repeat. But other than that, they put the ad together. I'm sure you saw this. I think you retweeted as well. And I'm sitting there thinking, first of all, I thought like, wow, this looks really great. Then I'm like, well, of course it looks great. I'm convincing myself of something that I thought would be great. So that's not really much of an insight. And then I'm like, why am I making free ads for this effing campaign? And what really bothered me, she had this tweet, she goes, which of these is better, Joe Biden or Donald Trump, for whatever reason? And the answer was none of the above. And I'm like, okay, it's not a multiple choice question. And you know what else is above? Your name. It says Joe Jorgensen, Bush, Trump. So none of the above includes you. Sorry, I was getting pedantic about this. Did you see that clip, and what were your thoughts? And should I be disturbed by this, that I'm making ads for them for free?
I saw the clip, and I don't have a problem with that, because honestly, we're not doing anything for free. We're doing our shows, which we're compensated for, and this is just our normal work. We didn't take the work to cut it together and do all that. Someone else did. And truthfully, I think that it's a demonstration. Obviously, like, your point is fair, that obviously it's going to convince us because we're the ones saying this is what's convincing. But I think that my guess is there's a lot of people who would feel that same way. And I like demonstrating to anyone who's willing to listen to it that, look, there is this powerful way to present the message. And so much of this, by the way, is why Trump was successful in 2016. Is like, there was this, like, I used to say this all the time, but it was like Trump came in and there were like pocket aces on the floor and no one else wanted to play them. And he was like, oh, no one wants to play these cards? I'll play these cards. These are really good cards. Let me play these cards. Like, what? No one else will say we should control the border? Okay, I'll be border control guy. I'll be the, like, no one else is going to say the Democrats and Republicans are screwing you over. Like, okay. We're Republicans, so we're not allowed to say we were lied into a war. What? Everyone knows we were lied into this war. Yeah. And he just played these very obvious popular hands. And to me, it's kind of like the point you were making in there, where you're just like, they yell at each other in front of your face and laugh at you behind your back. It's just like, it's so obvious and such a power. It's like one of those things where after someone says it, you're like, of course that's the message you should have. And so I kind of, being as that, I would like the Libertarian Party to try to introduce these ideas to some people. I'm very happy to give them the free support.
Hey guys, Michael Malice here. I want to tell you about possibly my favorite sponsor, Sheath Underwear. They grab me there every single day. If you go to sheathunderwear.com, SHEATH underwear.com, use code MALICE20, you get 20% off. What is Sheath Underwear? It was invented by a soldier who was serving Iraq, where things get a little hot. He's got his start in Kickstarter, just like I did. Sheath Underwear is a boxer brief, which is super soft and comfortable, hugs the body really well, but it has a dual pouch. So it makes part of your anatomy in one pouch, another part of your anatomy in another pouch, and it keeps it separated and fun. They brought it to the office. I've told this every week. And at first I'm like, what is this? And now they're the only underwear I wear because they are so comfortable. And there's something a little subversive about having your underwear holding your genitals while you're in a business meeting. I'm not going to lie. If you go to sheathunderwear.com and use promo code MALICE20, you get 20% off your order. They ship anywhere in the world. You are welcome. They also have a line of underwear for women too, but since women don't listen to that show, we're not talking about it. And if you are, go back to listening to Dave Smith. He wants your kind. Let's get back to it. I'm on the fence about because you're a member of the LP. I am not at all. I think it is, I don't know what the word I would use, and I wonder what word I should use. I don't want to say disingenuous, but insincere, something to the effect that they're acting like they're not seeing this or like acknowledging in any way. And it's like, okay, sweethearts, you're the LP. Like, you're not the RNC, you're not the DNC, you're not powerhouses. So, and especially in this context, social media. So don't act like you don't know what's going on, and don't pretend somehow you're above the fray, because you can't be above the fray when you are a very, 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 very distant third. You have to come out swinging to get any sort of attention. Jill Stein did that to some extent, and she got some traction for it. So that I think is the part that sits poorly with me.
Oh, I agree. It bothers me too. And I also know, because I've been in the party for the last couple of years, like, I know people that they all fucking know about us. Like, and obviously, how could they not?
I have more Twitter files than her. Her mentions are going through the roof. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. The thing to me that's frustrating is that it seems so obvious. Like, if I were, the LP, and I were in the business of running Jo Jorgensen's campaign, or her campaign manager, or the candidate, or something like that, it would seem so obvious to me that I'd be like, okay, well, what's the first move here? Okay, you have this thing that is the Libertarian Party. It's got, I don't know, under 20,000 dues-paying members. It's a very small little group of people. But then you have what is loosely known as the Liberty Movement, which is at least like 1 million people.
Oh
and
yeah,
and it's a big movement of now, not on the grand scheme of things. It's not,
sure.
a Trump or a Hillary Clinton 70 million type thing, but there's like a million people out there who really liked Ron Paul, really like Ayn Rand, are somewhere in the minarchist anarchist spectrum, and
Sure.
there's people like me and you and Tom and all these guys who have big audiences and we're in this world. So I would go, okay, number one, I'm uniting the liberty movement that this is our thing. As much as you can. Get the people who are already sold on the message fired up, and then every one of them can go out and try to get other people fired up about us. So but instead this pretend game where they like ignore us or don't like, or think somebody here might be problematic or dangerous or something like that. It's like, it just seems so obvious to me that this is terrible strategy. So that's one of the things that's frustrating to me.
Yeah, I'm surprised that I've been swimming in these circles for a very long time. I'd never even heard of her, and I don't know what that says. Maybe it's a statement of my ignorance, but I probably at the very
I don't
least
think so.
Okay.
Because I never heard of her either, and I think the vast majority of people hadn't heard of her. Now she was, if you really pay attention to LP politics, she was Harry Brown's
Right.
VP candidate back in whatever
96.
96. Okay, yeah. So there's that, but she's not someone with a very high profile until now, until getting the nomination.
So how was it having her on your show? What was that experience like? When was this?
This was, I don't know, was it a month and a half ago, maybe something like that. So it was right after she won the nomination, and it was nice. I mean, we had a good conversation about why, she's a libertarian, and kind of talked about how the campaign was, and it's kind of crazy that she ended up winning it. There were these other people who had much bigger names and people who had, were polling higher than her and stuff like that. And she was good. I mean, we had a good conversation. She's a good libertarian.
Okay, cool. Are you surprised? But I mean, is she running her Twitter? Someone is telling me that it's not her.
That's what I've heard.
That it's not her.
Yes.
Okay. Well,
but I think in many ways that might be worse.
Yes, I agree. It's much worse.
It's like I mean, I think it's debatable, but it's still a big problem. If you're in the business of running for president and you're starting on such a grassroots level, you should be running your own Twitter. You should really be in charge of what's being said out there. I mean, Trump's running his own Twitter. Like, why can't you? This is 2020. Social media is a big deal. Twitter's a big deal. You got to be on there, and you got to really be on top of your messaging. Now I'm having Spike Cohen on the show coming up soon, the VP nominee. And I have a feeling it's going to be a slightly different conversation, because now it's going to be impossible to not talk about some of the areas where I've been critical of the campaign. But I like Spike. I don't know that much about him, but I like him.
I like the name.
Yeah, it's a good name.
Yeah. So, geez, can we go 1 week without a Cohen on your show? Good Lord, it's kind of getting kind of excessive at this point. Do you think, I was very pleased to hear some news that I was kind of ecstatic about, and I wonder if you feel the same way. There was a piece out this morning in Politico where several prominent Democrats, some on the record, were speaking out against Kamala Harris as the vice presidential pick for Joe Biden. I have said publicly and repeatedly, and I believe it, that she was by far the most evil sociopath on that stage of all of them. I don't think anyone even comes close. Are you concerned about the possibility of her as the VP candidate, or do you think they're all pretty much the same? Like Susan Rice, if it's not her, is Susan Rice that much of an improvement in your opinion?
I think Susan Rice is debatably worse than her, but basically I think it's a wash. I think that would be exactly the same. I mean, Susan Rice was Barack Obama's national security advisor. Barack Obama had just one of the most outrageously evil foreign policies. The guy, not only continued the two disastrous wars of George W. Bush, but launched us into at least three new ones, three real disasters. There were military actions all over the place, but Libya, Syria, and Yemen are just, I mean, we don't even know the total number of deaths. It's greater than 500,000 in Syria. I have a feeling when the numbers are counted, it's going to be over 1 million in Yemen. We have no real information on that right now, but it's just outrageous, like borderline genocidal over there. And Libya, I mean, there's like slave markets. It's just destroyed nations. And he also, which is the one that really outrages me the most. And this is where I guess the last little shred of like nationalistic constitutional, like thing that I have in me is just that he literally committed treason. He funded Al Qaeda. I mean, and knowingly, they knew they were backing the jihadists to overthrow Gaddafi and then to try to overthrow Assad.
Al Qaeda or ISIS?
Well, it was Al Qaeda and it turned into
Okay.
ISIS. So it started with funding Al Qaeda, and then these crazy motherfuckers turned into the Islamic State when they basically, the split was basically that they were like, it's time to establish the Islamic State now. And the Bin Ladenite view was always that first we have to repeal the great Satan America from the region, and then we establish. So that's like kind of where their split was. They were like the radical arm of Al Qaeda in Iraq and Syria, and then they split into ISIS. And he funded them the whole way through, knowingly. And to me, that's like real deal treason. Like, these motherfuckers killed people in Manhattan, and you're gonna go, anyway. And she was all part of that web. So I put her as evil, as a horrifically aggressive prosecutor, Kamala Harris. So, but I don't really know that there'd be that much difference. I mean, truthfully, if having Dick Cheney to Barack Obama in there kind of continues the same policy, I don't really know that Kamala Harris or, one of the other, Elizabeth Warren, or so, I don't know in terms of policy if there'll be a difference. I do think it's hilarious that he boxed himself into this ridiculous woke corner where he's like, I'm going to pick a woman, probably a woman of color. Isn't it such an insulting thing to the VP nominee? Like, if you were gonna pick Kamala Harris, wouldn't the nicer thing be to Kamala Harris to be like, I'm gonna pick the most qualified person and then pick Kamala Harris? But to just let everybody know right away, I'm gonna pick the most qualified black lady, and that's Kamala Harris. It just seems like a dick move to your own VP. But yeah, I hate her. And I understand why the Democrats are worried about her. I think it's because they saw her campaign.
Yeah.
And they saw that people were not getting on board with her message, and she was murdered on stage by Tulsi Gabbard.
If they're thinking that we can get the soccer moms by having a cop as the VP, I don't think she's the cop to do it. Yeah. I think it'd be very hard to put her over because she's such a phony. As this kind of law and order type Democrat, which Joe Biden has much more of a credential and reputation for, and he could actually back it up more than her. So it's, but I'm concerned because I think she's much worse than Susan Rice. I think she is, because if I then became president, I think Susan Rice is more put together. She's more sane. She's more self-assured. It would be a continuation of the regime, that's for sure, but we know kind of what that looks like. With Kamala Harris, I think there's a screw loose. And I think when you have someone who's a bit of a loon like Hillary, things can get very dangerous very quickly.
Yeah, I do agree with you about the screw loose part. I think there's no question. Her weird laughs, and she's got a very strange sociopathic thing about her, and it's very creepy.
Yeah, and Susan Rice, from what I've seen, doesn't have that. Although it was just really funny. If you go to Susan Rice's Twitter, I just hit her this morning because she was trending, and I just clicked on it. And the top tweet is of Joe Biden hugging her at her mom's funeral. And it's like, I'm endorsing Joe Biden. Here's him hugging me at my mom's funeral. And I'm like, you're dragging out the body, of your mom just to get votes for this guy.
But that thing, whatever it is, I've noticed this. I don't know if you have, but there's been a real concerted effort from the corporate press that this is the angle they're going for that they think can win. It's Joe Biden's empathy. This has been something that I've noticed they're repeating over and over and over again, is how much empathy Joe Biden has. And I think this is their tactic to cover for kind of being a senile old man, but he's like a sweet grandpa, he's really empathetic. And then the other thing is that, they paint Trump as this kind of like,
doesn't care.
with some accuracy, as somebody who only cares about himself and doesn't care about the country or other people or people suffering at all. If you can get past they have a good point with the stuff about Trump, but the idea that like CNN and MSNBC just love empathy, I mean, these are the people who I'm so happy to hear he just settled out of court, but these are the people who literally tried to ruin the life of a 16-year-old kid.
He's got lots of other cases.
He's got 6 more, and he's already gotten settlements from CNN and the Washington Post. God bless that kid. I hope he gets a settlement from every one of them. And I don't really like defamation lawsuits in general, but I'm rooting for this kid.
I think things are very different when you're dealing with a minor.
A minor and the corporate press.
Yeah.
The corporate press, I just have different values with than I do with just like regular people.
The thing that people don't understand, there's a defamation lawsuit that was done by our buddy Walter Block. Mm-hmm. And for people who don't realize just how depraved they are and how dishonest they are, he had said, and he sued the New York Times over this, he had said, slavery wasn't bad because they're picking cotton and dancing in the fields. It was bad because you were the property of your landowner, you couldn't leave, blah, blah, blah. Right? And they quoted him as saying, factually, but not truthfully, slavery wasn't bad because you were picking cotton and singing in the fields. And it's like, this is not something where it's an accident. It's not something where you can misinterpret what the person meant. You don't stop listening mid-sentence. You know what I mean? And if you are, you shouldn't be a reporter.
So yeah, do you know the story on this, which is just, it's like one of my favorite little libertarian stories ever.
Please tell me more.
So this is when Rand Paul was doing really well in the polls. If you remember, at one point, like a couple years out of the election, he was like polling #1. Yeah. And he was Time Magazine's most interesting person. And it looked like Rand Paul was going to really grow the Ron Paul movement. So the New York Times went to the Mises Institute to try to get dirt to tie Rand Paul to the Mises Institute. And so they interviewed they interviewed Walter Block. Now, Walter Block, of course, just speaks completely freely, like unguarded. That's just his style. Like, he's like, oh, come on, libertarianism? Let me explain all about libertarianism. So they, of course, slandered him. Tom Woods was like precise to say everything. So there's no way they could possibly slander him. And they asked Lou Rockwell for an interview. And Lou Rockwell said, "You're part of the regime. I don't speak to you."
And he kicked him off the property.
Yeah, which is just the greatest thing ever. Just the greatest, because literally so by the way, what they did with Tom Woods' nuanced perfect interview, they didn't run any of it. They didn't run a single word of it because there was nothing there they could do. They took friendly Walter Block and tried to ruin him. And like you said, truthful, but deceitful. And then Lou Rockwell kicked him off the property.
So that I mentioned this article in my book because it starts out by saying like, oh, the Mises Institute is a mix of like 9/11 truthers and this and that, basically trying to tie people together by the most, horrific descriptors possible. And then I think it's like paragraph 5. I think it's literally paragraph 5 where they're like, Senator Paul has never been to the Mises Institute and says he has no relationship with any of these people. And it's like, holy, if you call your editor and be like, oh, bad news, he's never been there and doesn't know these guys, it's like, this isn't a story then.
Yeah.
And that's
it was enough for them. His father's
agenda.
been there. Yeah. His father's been there. And the goal of that's right. It's an agenda. The goal of this is to slander him. So it's enough for us. We'll go with that.
It's enough for me. We're running out of time. What has been your favorite part of this episode?
My favorite part of this episode was getting your tacit endorsement for president of the United Skanks of America.
You are welcome.